In this video, I interviewed Craig Johnson, who wrote the Longmire books that the hit Netflix show Longmire is based on. We talked about Longmire the show, Longmire the books, and a little bit about Heartland too, for you Heartlanders out there. Here you go.
There's the cat coming down the stairs right there behind me. She only has three legs, like it. So she
Oh,
does the
really?
yeah.
Is she a character in one of your books?
No, she's not a character in one of the books. She's a character around the house, is what she is. We're we live far enough out, but not so far out that people can't like drop animals, down by the road like it. And so I kind of tend to refer to our ranch. Do you remember the old claymation uh, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? You know,
Yeah, like at Christmas time?
yeah. And there was the island for misfit toys. Like that's kind of what I refer to our ranch as, is kind of the island of misfit toys. Every one-eared, three-legged, half-blind animal like that in Johnson County ends up, down there at the end of our ranch road. And
That's
stuff.
awesome. That's really nice of
Yeah.
you, though.
Yeah, they all end up being parts of the family like that. So it's great. Thanks for having me on. Like
Oh, of
that.
course. The show is great. The books are great. You're really prolific. Do you have a schedule where you like write every morning or?
I do. I mean, I come from a blue collar family like that, and I've worked, my whole life and everything. And so I have a hard time being a dilettante, in just about anything. I mean, if I'm doing something, I'm putting everything I've got into it and working on it as hard as I can. And the statement I generally make is that I write 6 days a week and cheat on Sundays. Because it's also one of those things where if you really enjoy, I'm going to sound like a homily factor here, but it's if you really enjoy what it is that you do, if you really, it becomes a part of your life to the point where it's
Yeah,
almost like breathing or eating, then or sleeping or whatever like that. You never work a day in your life. It's true like that,
so
and
true.
I can't, wait. Always like that. First thing will always be, get everything here at the ranch squared away like that, and then it's got to be the writing like that. And I'll sit down in the morning with my energies when they're at their best like that, and then start writing and working. And then if that peters out like that in the afternoon like that, then there's always more work at the ranch, sitting around waiting, to happen like that. And it's kind of a nice life, to be honest, because it's kind of a balance, between an intellectual life, where you're sitting and writing and you know
Right.
and doing all of the research, and all of that, like that, and the structure of the novel, like that, and actually writing it. And then there's the physical work of actually being on a ranch, like that, which is a lot of work. Like that, according to what time of year, people sometimes ask me what's my favorite time of year, and I'm always like winter, because everything slows down and stops like that, and I can really focus on the writing. But now we're kind of going into spring. Now I mean it just snowed yesterday like that, but we're going into spring, and it'll be a lot more work as far as the irrigation is concerned, and getting stock all set and
Well,
everything.
do you just have animals or do you also grow like vegetables or have a fruit orchard?
Well, everybody here does hay. Oh, and there's Annie the dog. Look at, and so feel free to take her out. Yes, look at, yeah, yeah. Everybody here grows hay because it's livestock. It's all livestock area like that. This entire area of northern Wyoming, especially here along the Bighorn Mountains. We've got these mountains that are about 14,000 feet. And in our reckoning, like that, in many ways, it's kind of money in the bank. All that snow that's up there because it's irrigation that comes down. The
Mm,
majority of Wyoming and our portion of Montana too is kind of high elevation, high desert, high plains is what they refer to it as. And there's not a lot of water. It's not like Massachusetts. Like there's not a lot
yeah,
of
it's
water.
wet
Like
here.
that. And so what water we have, like that melts off the mountains, is kept in like, irrigation reservoirs, at the base of the mountains, like that, or in the mountains, and then slowly let out during irrigation ditches like that, and then you utilize the water for most of the time it's growing hay like that. Although we do have some instances where you've got some winter wheat like that, and you've also got some where it's sugar beets and things like that. But generally, it's for stock, is what it is, because this is a cattle world, where we are. It's cattle and sheep and all that type of thing.
It sounds so much like Alberta, like where I don't know if you watch Heartland, where Heartland takes place, and the main cast member, Amber Marshall, she actually has a ranch also. She sounds
Uh-huh.
very similar to you,
Yeah,
actually.
well, we are. We're just a little further to the south. That's all.
Right.
Like it's exactly the same. I actually I have to admit, and this is funny. Like you'll get a laugh out of this. I had not heard of the show. Like, and so I went and watched a couple of trailers like that, because I have a limited amount of time I always laugh when people ask me if I've seen a TV show because I always look at them and go, I'm lucky if I've seen our TV show. So I just don't get that much of a chance, to actually sit down and watch a lot of television like that. But I went and I watched a couple of trailers like that, and it was beautiful scenery like that, and
Yep.
very handsome people. That's the thing
Yes.
I've noticed about television. It's like whenever our TV show came out, people asked me, they said, well, what's the biggest difference between the books and the TV show? And I said, everybody's way too good looking.
So
That's the
true.
big thing. So, but I guess that's a thing with Hollywood. They want everybody to be good looking like that, so that it draws an audience in. But yeah, like that. I had not seen the television show. Like I know it's a Canadian production like that, and I had to laugh though like that because I was going out and doing I did a library event in Miles City this last weekend like that, and I was talking to some people there, including like at the young woman that works for us, at the store that we have in town, and they had all heard of the store, all heard of the television show. Like
Oh yeah.
so it's I guess I'm a little behind the curve on that as far as it's
If
concerned.
you
So
do get a chance, you have to watch it. It actually was in 2023 the fifth most streamed show on Netflix, and it's going
wow,
into its 18th season this year. So it's very popular in Canada.
that's
But
amazing. That's amazing.
it's
Like it.
amazing, but a lot of people haven't heard of it, so I'm not surprised. I've met people and they just started watching it, and I'm telling you, I know you don't watch a lot of TV, but everyone that I've told about it and starts watching it, it becomes, I mean, in your case, your second favorite show, but their favorite show.
Well, it's been interesting too, like because I mean, with the history of the television show for Longmire is, obviously Netflix was a lifeline for us like that because
Yeah.
we were the highest rated scripted drama that A&E had like that. And the problem was is they wanted to buy the show from Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers wouldn't sell it. And so,
Oh,
they basically canceled us like that because they couldn't buy the show.
oh,
Well,
there's so many rumors about that. Everyone thinks it's because Lou Diamond Phillips didn't want to keep working on it. Some people will
no,
say
no,
something
no,
else.
not at
I figured
all.
it had
Not
to
at
do with
all.
money. It usually does in the producer.
It was like, and when because obviously a broadcasting entity can make a lot more money off of a hit show if they own it, rather
Yeah.
than if leasing it, from a production company like Warner Brothers, like a studio from Warner Brothers, and I guess A&E decided to be stupid, like it, and so they canceled the highest rated scripted drama they ever had. Like, and we were very, very lucky because that was when Netflix was really starting to get some traction at that point in time, but was still very early on, in their existence. Like, and so they picked up the show, ran it for 3 years, and then of course what happens is that it was one of their best, reviewed shows and one of the best viewed shows, and
Yeah.
so they tried to buy it, from Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers wouldn't sell it to them either, like that, and they were a little more gracious than A&E, like it, and said, well, we're gonna do this sixth season, but then we're gonna stop.
I
And
know.
I think in the back of their minds, what they were thinking was, we've got this little Indian cowboy show. It's doing really well, but when we stop making new episodes, it'll calm down, and then we'll just quietly, cancel it, and that'll be the end of it. Well, that was like 7 years ago,
And it's
and the show
still
is
really
still
popular.
it's still one of the top 10 to 20 shows every
Exactly.
week.
I just
So
started watching it this past year because if you look for shows like Heartland, I tell Heartland people at Heartland about it all the time, and they either have watched it and love it and want it to keep going, or they're just starting to watch it now because there's not a lot of shows about like the rural lifestyle and people
uh-huh.
living out in the country. Longmire and Heartland, that's about the only two.
I was interested too, like that, because just obviously, just I've got a limited information about the show itself, but it seems like more of a sweeping, family saga,
Yeah.
kind of show. So it's not crime oriented, and so obviously Longmire, it deals with some like weighty issues like that, and
Yes.
some social issues like that, and some violence and things like that. And I was kind of curious like that, but I guess that it's nice that the viewers of Heartland have embraced Longmire because they realize that yeah, these characters might have some rough edges, and the stories might have some rough edges, but these are really good people making
And they're
sacrifices in
really
their
great characters. The characters,
lives.
there have been so many shows that have tried to
I'm not going to
copy.
argue with you about that. Like,
Yeah.
but an awful lot of time like that, the way, we in the rural or flyover portions, of America and Canada, probably even worse in Canada. Because what is it? I mean, I get something like 80% of the population of
Yeah.
Canada lives within
Lives
like
within
60
200 miles of
miles
the
of the
border of
border
the
of the
US.
United
Yeah.
States. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that an awful lot of the time there are a lot of stereotypes, like, and a lot of,
Yeah.
people that have an idea about characters like that. And it comes across not only in television, but also, in books too. You see that a lot of the times. I mean, whenever I'm reading a book that supposedly takes place in our part of the world, or takes place, here in, in Wyoming or something like that. And I'm like, that would never happen here in a million years. Like, and that character, there are some TV shows that I see that take place in our part of the world that I'm just appalled by, because I'm like, we don't act like that, but it does happen that way. Like, and so I think, it's nice when people respond, to something that's maybe just a little bit more honest about,
Yeah.
human nature, like that, and it's especially like a geographic area and all that type of thing. And then you're seeing I mean, obviously since the pandemic and all of that, there's been a little bit of a rush, for a lot of people to think that maybe a rural lifestyle like that is a little bit more more
Yeah.
appealing like that, than being stacked upon top of each other, like in an apartment building somewhere. And then there's also, the really
That's true.
wonderful response that you see from people who do live in like more urban areas. I mean, my gosh, I mean, I can't remember. There was somebody that came up with a map, and I saw it. I think it was on social media or something. And they had a map of like all the counties in the United States that have more population than the entire state of Wyoming. Like, and then there were a lot of them, like, and
Yeah.
no, I think for a lot of those people, in many ways, they're looking for something. They're looking for something that might be, a more natural,
Yes.
easier, and simpler, life that's not as, convoluted and complicated and difficult and all of that. And
Yeah,
also,
exactly.
wanting to be outdoors, wanting to be outdoors. I kind of, when I was talking about that before, as far as like, I love writing. Don't get me wrong. I love sitting up there in my loft and writing and all that. But I also enjoy going out. One of the things I'm going to do as soon as I finish up here is go down and feed the horses, like, and talk with them about what I'm going to write today. And they're really great writing partners because they listen very intently, because I haven't fed them yet. And then, they don't offer any advice at all. They let me do whatever it is that I want to do. So they're really great writing partners like that. But just being outside, just being, out and away. It's something that I think, that people have an innate understanding with. I think it was Wallace Stegner, when he was talking about the protection of the national forests. One of the things he said, we have to protect the wild and open spaces that we have simply because of the way they make us feel when we look upon them.
Now, what is your favorite book? I know again you don't want to talk too much about yourself.
Oh, let's see. Not mine, right? Not talking about mine. You're talking about, but just
Well, just yeah, just
books
in
in
general, because
general.
I think because in the show they show Sheriff Longmire like he always has of Mice and Men. Mice and Men, your favorite book?
It's one of like, I mean, one of my favorite authors of all time is John Steinbeck. Which, as I'm sitting here talking with you, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, you know what? That's basically what I mean. He was from like Monterey and, Cannery Row in that area in California, like that, but was very much, from a farming
Yeah,
community there in Salina. And it just dawned on me that, a lot of people might refer to him as a rural writer. I got into a big argument one time at the Western Writers of America Association meeting. I was on a panel, and they wanted us to talk about our favorite, Western writer. And I started talking about John Steinbeck, and they said, well, he's not a Western writer. And I'm like, he's about as far west as you can
that's
go
true. It's
without going to
California.
Hawaii. Like, I was like, what are you kidding me? The Red Pony, Mice and Men, all these, those aren't Westerns, for goodness sake. Yes, they are Westerns like that. But I've got a great weakness for John Steinbeck, just simply because of, once again, as you mentioned before, structure of character, depth of character. He
Yeah,
also wasn't afraid to take on, huge social issues. I mean,
yeah,
anybody that writes a book like Grapes of Wrath, for
right.
goodness sake, and I laugh whenever I go to Salina, California, like that, because you know, now the biggest building in Salina, California is the John Steinbeck Museum, like that, right there, right in there in the center of town, and right there in the center of the square of the town, like that. And you know what? It was only about 70 years ago that they were burning his books out there, in the park in the center of town, like that, because they said he was a socialist, like a communist, and all of this, like that. And
That's
so it's
crazy.
kind of fun, how good literature triumphs overall, like that, that it's something that, will continue on even after the politics, like, and the anger and all of this and the disagreements all continue. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that's one like that. And then another one like that, of course, is To Kill a Mockingbird. Like that, I just that is just a it's just a literary napalm. I defy anybody to open up any page in that book and not be stuck immediately
Yeah.
and burned by it. I mean, you're going to have to read that book every time you pick it up. That's why I hide it, in the shelves like that, because I've read it about 87 times like that. And and then there are also like other genres that I really enjoy, like that. I'm, a big fan of George MacDonald Fraser, a Scottish writer who wrote the Flashman series, like it, and wrote a number of memoirs about his experiences in North Africa during World War II, which are some of the funniest writing that you'll ever, want to read. Which sounds a little odd, like that it's a war memoir, but still one of the funniest things like that you could ever possibly want to read. But I think that kind of speaks to the fact that even with the Walt books, I mean, Walt's in a very dangerous situation,
Right.
like it's a very highly difficult job like that. But one of the big things for me is having a sense of humor as
Yeah, I
well.
love that.
I mean, that's the only way you get through to the end of the day. I always laugh whenever I get emails, from like highway patrolmen or sheriffs like that, or, police officers who write me and say they love the books. And one of the first things they always say is it's the humor. It's the humor in the
It
books
is.
that
It's the humor. It's so cool that how you have, like you said, these deep topics, but I mean, at the same point, there is a level like as a human being, you want to be entertained or maybe like not have so much stress and that humor really
Oh, you
it's
you
great
got to
in
be
the
able to
show too
balance
and the
the
book.
two. Yeah, you got to be able to balance the two, like that, and then again, like anybody that's ever had a difficult job, like whether it's in law enforcement or in like the medical field or a teacher or anything like that.
Yeah,
The only way that you get through to the end of the day, I mean, ranching like that, if you're out there like that, and it's your branding season like that, or it's
right.
calving season or something like that, the day starts getting long like that, it's 102 degrees like that, and you're out there in the dust and the dirt and the blood and everything and the mud and trying to get stuff done, and you're covered in cow shit, but I mean it's the work, and so you got to get it done. And so how do you do that? By having a sense of humor. You got to have one.
Now, I know, but what's his character? He's always reading. Is that because is this character based off of you? Like, you talked about you like the similar books, and then of
Yeah,
course,
I think so. I mean, I'm a firm believer like that there's an exercise for your mind, whenever you read like that. I mean, I love Hollywood. Don't get me wrong; it's great. It's been inordinately kind to me over the years like that, and I've garnered a great deal of like readers from people who get that little blip at the beginning of every episode of Longmire that says, based on the novels by Craig
yeah,
Johnson. I can't afford publicity like that. That's
right,
pretty
right,
wonderful. But to be honest, I also have to admit though that like as wonderful as Hollywood is with its hundreds of millions of dollar budgets, its big name stars like that, its locations, its costumes, it's got all of these things going for it and everything. But the one thing it doesn't have that I as a novelist have is the reader's imagination. I mean, that's what I do. That's my job. Like that is to line those books up, I mean, those words up. I'm a wordsmith. I line those words up like that, and I get to work in the reader's imagination. I get to crawl into that imagination of their mind, and then they get to assimilate and put together this story exactly the way they want it. I mean, Hollywood is great, like it,
yeah,
but it kind of force feeds its view,
yeah.
of what things should look like, of what characters should look like, what they should sound like. Again,
I
the
wanted to ask you that. How different are I don't know if you can talk about all of them, but are there any characters in the show that were not in your books? And how different are the characters in the show from the books?
They actually were pretty close like that. They did change a few who did, I think they did a marvelous job. Like at the first one that comes to mind would be the Ferg, which was a role played by Adam Bartley, like that, who's one of Walt's deputies. Like that. And in the books, like that, he's a contemporary of Walt's, pretty much the same age as Walt and right there on the verge of, retiring. He's kind of Walt if Walt had like, had a different career path. And I like that character like that. But what they did was make him more of an acolyte, like to Walt, someone who's like learning and trying to, be a Walt.
Right.
And, Adam Bartley did a fantastic job portraying that character. And so it was much fun, watching how they changed it and why they changed it. An awful lot of the time, I think the way reason they changed the characters around Walt in some small ways was because that way Walt would have somebody to explain to
Right.
someone who could play the audience member so that they could they could explain that information to the to the viewers without having to have subtitles down along the bottom something along those lines. Another one was they needed an antagonist. They needed a regular antagonist for Walt. They were fortunate enough to get A. Martinez, who is just an absolutely fabulous actor and is constantly working, just constantly like that. And they put him in as Jacob Nighthorse,
I
the owner of
know.
casino like that, and I think he does a fabulous job about playing that role like that. And then of course there was another one that they switched over like that because the chief of police in my books up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is female. And whenever they did it, they switched it over and got Zahn McLaren, who's another spectacular actor like that, and it got him to play the role and made the character, male. And I got to be honest with you and just sneak this in really quick. One of the things I'm really proud of is the fact that in the 6 years of production that Longmire had, I think we gave more native actors work than the rest of Hollywood combined. And so it's really kind of
Yeah,
spectacular to see all of them, doing all of this incredible work right now. But yeah, and then it was interesting some of the changes that they made like that, and to see why they did certain things the way they did them, mostly because of television production like that. Because I'm
right.
not a production guy. I'm not a director. I'm not an actor. I'm none of those things
Yeah, I
like
was going
that.
to
So
ask you, is that something that you are ever going to be interested in? Are you interested in it now because you have a show
I've got
coming?
another project that I'm working on. Like that, I've got another piece that I'm working on. Like that, I think that's very, very different, from Walt. Like that, but it's a unique piece. Like it's a very different, kind of take, on a crime, show. And yeah, I mean, I toy with it every once in a while, like that. But then again, I've also got like a piece of literary fiction that I'm working on. I've got a traditional Western that I'm working on. I've got a mystery novel that takes place in Berlin in 1945. I've got all these other projects that I'm working on. Like it's just a question of leave me alone for long enough to be able to work on them. Like that's the
Well,
difficulty.
is First Frost, your new book that's coming out in May, at the end of May, is
Uh-huh.
that Walt and is that also a Walt Longmire novel? Is that the 24?
It is, but it's a little bit unique. Like that, I mean, the nice thing about it is when I first started writing the books, I wrote the first book, The Cold Dish, and I wrote it like that, and it got picked up, by a big publisher in New York, Viking Penguin, and the president of Penguin and one of the senior editors there, Catherine Court, took me aside and said, "Hey." She was this tiny little British woman like that, and she said, "We really love these characters." And I'm like, "Thank you." Like, and she said, "We really love this place, and it just kind of harkens back to what we're talking about here, like
Yeah.
that." She said, "This is a very unique place, and we just think that, like, boy, there are more stories, for these characters to tell in this place, and we think that you should think about possibly doing this as a series." And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had one book published yet, started arguing with the president of Penguin and going, "Yeah, no, I don't think that'll work. I don't think that's a good idea, but I've got some other ideas I want to bounce off of." And her response to me was, "Well, why don't you go back to your ranch in Wyoming and sit down and think about this?" Like, and so I did like that. And then one of the things you might not be aware of is the first draft of The Cold Dish, the very first Walt Longmire book, was like 650 pages long. It was like War and Peace in Absaroka County was what it was like. Like,
Wow.
and one of the first things my agent said to me, Gail, she said, "You're going to have to cut like 200, 250 pages out of this thing
Was
before we
that
can."
hard? That must have been so difficult. And you come
It,
in love with your book, so it's hard to.
it was difficult. That first one was, like, because, but you also, writing a novel in many ways is not really so much of a destination as it is, more of a journey.
Mm.
And you learn a lot, on that journey. And one of the things you learn after you get finally to the end, boom, the end, uh, is what really needs to be in that book. And then go back and it becomes painfully obvious the stuff that you jammed in there that really doesn't need to be there. And so I kind of became aware, of the things that I needed to take out of there, and I did. I took like about 200, 250 pages, out of that book, and I had all that extra material. Like, and a lot of it was backstory,
Oh, right.
for a lot of the characters, a lot of like, scenes, flashback scenes of their relationships, and all this type of stuff. And I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe there are, more stories, here to tell.
Wow.
And
And that's how you wrote 19 more books?
that's how it all happened. Yeah,
That's
yeah. Believe it
amazing.
or not. And I don't know. I mean, one of the other dirty little secrets is that just about all of my books are based off of newspaper articles. I love newspapers. I still, I run around and collect newspapers everywhere that I go. I picked up the newspaper from Miles City, like everywhere up in that area this weekend, because
That makes sense though.
yeah,
Makes
and I
sense.
can use it, because it kind of keeps Walt grounded
Yeah.
in a reality, of what Western sheriffs are kind of dealing with. I mean, I don't want to ever have Walt out chasing Al Qaeda in Crook County. I don't want to ever have Walt, on a cruise ship. I don't ever have Walt on a spaceship or something like that. I
Exactly.
want Walt, dealing with the things Western sheriffs deal with. So,
But is there that many murders in Absaroka County? I have
there
to ask
aren't.
you.
Now you've tripped me up here like that, because that was the difficulty when I first started writing the books. Like at everything in crime fiction at that point in time, you got to remember this was like more than 20 years ago. Everything in crime fiction at that point in time was very noir. It was very dark, urban, gritty, kind of storylines with alcoholic, divorced detectives
J.D.
burying
Ross.
bodies in their backyards and all this kind of stuff. And I just thought, well, all the people that I know in law enforcement have made like really incredible, sacrifices in their lives, to do the right thing like that and really help people, and help support, a society, a civilized, community. And I thought, well, what if you had the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state? That would be something very different, from what
Yeah.
everybody else is doing. Of course, I did not take into consideration how many people can you kill in that county before it really becomes kind of stupid. And so what I did was at that point in time, I kind of came up with this idea of home and away. So I kind of treat Walt almost like a ball team. What he does is like, he'll have a home, adventure like that, here in Absaroka County like that. But, in law enforcement, if you develop a technique, if you develop a reputation as, someone who can really break cold cases, someone who can really see things maybe that other people have missed, you get a lot of phone calls, you get a lot of
That
emails,
makes
it's
sense.
not
Yeah.
the way it's portrayed a lot of times in Hollywood where it's like, hey man, this is our jurisdiction and our turf. Most generally, I have
Be
actually heard
collaborative.
Wyoming sheriffs say to each other, hey, if you'll drive over and take a look at this file, like we'll pay for your gas, and so what it did is that way Walt has the opportunity to get, invited out to other parts of Wyoming, up in Montana, over in South Dakota. I haven't done Canada yet, like or Massachusetts, like that, but you never know. I did do one like at the third book actually takes place the majority of it in Philadelphia. And then the fourth book took place, in Vietnam in 1968, like that. And then, of course, to go back, you mentioned First Frost, like at the one
Yeah.
that's coming out on May 28th. The majority of it takes place along Route 66 in 1964.
Wow.
Walt and Henry graduate from college, and they can read the writing on the wall. They're going to lose their deferment, and they're going to get drafted, is what's going to happen. And so they go and they volunteer to go to Vietnam.
Wow.
And Henry has to show up at Fort Polk, Louisiana, Tigerland.
I mean,
Uh,
Henry is a very fascinating character. I don't, I'm not surprised you could write so many books because not only Longmire is such a fascinating character, you have all these, ancillary characters that are so
Thank
great.
you. Yeah. I mean, he graduates from Berkeley, like that, where he majored in, revolution, like that, and Henry graduates from USC, where he graduated in being an offensive lineman, won a Rose Bowl, like that. But Henry's got to go to Fort Polk. Walt's got to go to Fort Paris Island, off the coast, of South Carolina, like that. And so, it leads to this epic road trip in 1964, like that. Well, what road are you going to take to go across the United States in 1964? It's going to be Route 66. Look at, and
Oh,
so
man.
it's about this epic road trip that they take. And the big question, of course, is how far do they get before they get into trouble? Well, they barely get into Arizona, and so it's probably going to end up being a trilogy somewhere in the long run. I'll write
Well,
another one in 5 years or another one in 10. So
they're such good guys. I mean, I don't want to relate them to like Superman or something, but I often feel like Walt Longmire is like the Superman of sheriffs almost. Like he's such a good guy, and Henry being, standing there like they're almost like they don't have supernatural, elements to them, but they could be almost,
Oh yeah.
Hey,
Well, I mean, we all kind of have, super powers like it, and our superpowers, you hope are decency,
right.
kindness,
And that's what's
caring,
so cool about them because they both are, and they're good friends, which makes sense. So they both have very similar morals and
hmm
background.
Yeah,
It's
no,
really
I
neat.
think that, that when I wrote the first book, The Cold Dish, like it, I obviously needed, two individuals that were going to be emblematic of their cultures, like and the two major cultures that we have here on the high plains are the native culture, like that, and the white culture, like it. And so for me it was interesting, to have them be good friends, like it, and have them be
Yeah.
very strong believers, like that, in the society, and how you help each other, like that. I mean, I always laugh, because a lot of people have this idea, maybe, from a lot of bad movies that they've watched too many times, but they have this idea that, that it's this, that every man is an island, and every man takes care of himself out here, and
Right.
nobody depends on anybody else for anything like that. Well, anybody that ever lived in a ranching community knows
It's
that's
actually the
not
opposite.
true, like that. Yeah, you
Right.
need the help of your friends and neighbors on a regular basis, like that.
Right.
I mean, if a blizzard comes in
But
and you got to get the cows
I
moved
think
in.
that's why people find your book so appealing and the rural lifestyle because it is way more community oriented. And I think every human being is actually searching for that, even though our modern society tells you not to. So I think that's what's so cool about it.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that it's that society and that culture like that, and it's all in how it's portrayed. If there's an honesty to it, and a
Yeah.
kindness to it, I think that's it. I mean, and I go back to that word like that I use. Whenever anybody gets me to try and describe Walt in one word, I'm always like decent. He's
Yeah.
decent. The way I've described Walt is like, okay, if I'm driving along on I-25 or I-80 in January, like in a snowstorm, and I slide off the road into a ditch, the set of headlights that I see pulling up behind me, that's the guy I want.
Yeah.
I want Walt Longmire pulling up to help me out
Yeah.
here.
Oh, it was so cool to learn more about the Longmire books, the show, and Craig's life on a Wyoming ranch. And if you want to know more about Craig, you can actually meet him yourself, as he's going to be going on a 26-city book tour starting soon. I'll put more about that in the description below this video. And you can watch Longmire on Netflix. And Craig's new book, First Frost, will be dropping on May 28th. You can find it on Amazon or in bookstores near you. And please let me know what you thought of this interview and what other interviews you'd like to see in the comments below. Bye for now.